Do you want to spice up a drum part to make it more interesting in your music? In this video, we'll walk through how to take a plain drum loop or drum part like this and turn it into something more engaging like this. This concept can be applied to programmed drums, which I'll be using here, or to live drums as well. Also, if you'd like to see more videos on music production, songwriting, or breakdowns of my own music, go ahead and subscribe to my channel for more. Let's dive into how to layer these drums. Here's the section of the song that I'll play without the added drum layers, and let's listen for three main issues that I have with the drum part here. The first is that the kick is just not quite powerful enough. It doesn't have that low end or that drive that I want for this chorus section of the song. The second is that the snare is just going to get a little bit boring. And the third is that overall this part just lacks energy and that feeling of pace that I want to have that excitement building into the chorus. So let's listen to it and then we'll talk through how we fix those problems by layering drums. So as we listen to the original, more live sounding kick, it's got a good roominess feel to it and has, like I said, that more live feeling, but it doesn't quite have that drive. So to fix that, I just brought up another track with battery loaded. You could also just use any other kick sample that would fit what you're needing. And I found a kick that has more low end and a little bit more punch, or is just a little more aggressive, or has a shorter attack for that initial energy, that initial transient that I'm getting from that kick sound. So when we hear both of those together now, or even just the added kick, so just my new lower kick, that has a little more of that low end and a little more of that punch. And so together, it just drives that drum beat a little harder. When we hear it with that entire original drum piece now, and without the added kick, so it's subtle, but just like with everything in music production, it's those small pieces along the way that by the end of it can make a huge difference as you're putting them all together. So that's the first piece, is the kick. The next is to address that kind of boring snare sound when it's just one. So in the initial piece that we showed, it's just this single snare sound the entire time. That's going to get a little boring and probably pretty quickly. So to address that, what I've done here is first added another snare track with a different snare sample. So you can see I'm using a different snare sample here. And we've done a few things to treat that as well. So first I'll just play it and then I'll talk through what we're changing on it. So on every other hit, we're adding that new snare sound as another layer on our snare hits. And what we're doing here, first, taking out a lot of the low end here because we're just layering it. So any low end that I already have from the initial snare, I don't want to build that up and just create a lot of muddiness or a lot of boominess and just eat up headroom for something that's already been taken care of. The next thing, we have a few other just noise gates and compression on it for sound design. But the other big thing that I want to cover is just our reverb and our delay. So compared to our initial snare sound, the boring one, is what we'll call, it has very little delay and very little long reverb compared to our new one. And what that does is it brings more space to our drum part by having the contrast of that up close sounding snare of our initial boring snare sound, pairing it with the bigger or more reverb-y style second snare on every other hit here. It also has a nice sense of subtle movement added by adding that ping pong delay on our second snare. So you can hear that delay bouncing back and forth left to right as that moves on. So another very subtle thing in the background that's keeping that drum beat moving more than it was initially. The next piece that we add in is a third snare layer, this time on every fourth hit. And we're treating this again a little differently by taking out the low end with the EQ, as you see there, adding even more reverb and more snare. So this is going to have similar impact to that second snare, but even more drastic. The other thing we've done differently here is instead of a new sample, we've taken the same sample from the first track and pitched it down 7 semitones. The first one was actually pitched up 19 semitones here, so it has a much higher pitch than our low one. And by doing this, it just adds more contrast to that fourth hit, extends the loop, if you will. So instead of just the same every 2 bars, now there's something new happening every 4 bars by placing it on that fourth hit. So after that first hit, you're already waiting another 4 bars to hear that again, instead of just waiting 1 or 2 bars to hear that first or second snare again. So that's something that's going to be more interesting for your listeners, having that longer pattern in your drum loop that they can listen for. And just to reiterate there on this snare, we are EQing this, even taking out some of the upper mids here. Again, we're layering this, so we don't want to overkill any of the frequencies that we're already covering with the other snares. These are just really sound design pieces, and you're taking the pieces that you like about each of those snare parts and gluing them together, especially when they're hitting at the same time, so that they sound good altogether, not necessarily how do you make each one sound best individually. It's about that layered approach. And the last thing that we'll review here that I've layered on top of the hi-hat sounds is a little bit of a bonus round. It's something I added in to add more energy to this drum part and also fit with more of the style that I was going for in my own music. So here I've taken recordings of me just hitting drumsticks against each other, and I'm going to layer that on top of my initial hi-hat sound. So here we'll add it in. So again, if we just hear the stick pattern here, and to treat that stick pattern, we've EQ'd out a lot of that low end. We just want some of that higher frequency energy to be layered in on top of our hi-hat. I've added an exciter here, and I'm also using tremolo to add back and forth movement just for even more movement to add some other rhythms within rhythms here on our drum part. Great, so let's listen back through to each of those layers that we've added in individually and then in context with the whole mix. So we'll see how they've changed from our original drum loop and built it back up to something that's much more interesting. So this was the original. And then we added our kick layer. So here's the kick layer soloed. And with the original. After that, we added our second snare layer. So here it is. A little bit of that reverb and delay. And then let's just hear that layered in with the original. After that, we added our other snare layer, which was even more reverby and more delay-y. So here it is soloed. And now that in context with the other parts as well. And then finally, we added this little bit of a bonus around here by recording a stick pattern on top of that hi-hat pattern, adding some back and forth movement as well for even more interesting movement of that drum part. Here it is soloed. And now in context with our whole mix. Awesome. So we started with a pretty simple drum part here. We ended up with something that's really still pretty simple, but sounds a lot more interesting and addressed the main problems that we set out to take care of at the beginning, which were the kick just wasn't powerful enough for what we were looking for. The snare got boring very quickly. And overall, the driving drum pieces, the kick, snare, and hi-hat, just didn't have the energy that I wanted in the chorus of the song. So by layering that kick, layering several snares, and varying the roominess and pitches of those snares, we were able to add a lot of depth and movement to that production, especially with the subtle delay bouncing back and forth from those snares. And then finally added that little more unique style for my own music where I added the sticks hitting each other with the back and forth tremolo on top of our hi-hat. And overall, still a simple drum beat, nothing drastically changed, but the overall sound and listening experience went from a short loop to something that now has elements that at least last over 4 bars and have more polyrhythms going back and forth with some of the delay and tremolos. And overall, just a drum part that better fits the song that I was writing it with. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. Like I said earlier, if you want to see more videos on music production, songwriting, breakdowns of my own music, or even live streams of me making songs from scratch, go ahead and subscribe to my channel for more. This is Marcus, aka Cradle Cat, and I'll see you next time. Write them down before you take another drink. Here's the hoping that this here lift your hesitations. Here's the hoping that the